Good evening, this is Matt Carty here. This is the European Parliament in Strasbourg, and I think for the 27th time this is not the RTE news. And just to show how enthusiastic we remain, we have done absolutely no preparation for Taxhaven. We don't even have our Towards the United Ireland mugs.
It's a bunch of sinners talking to each other.
Emma's given away a free bottle of even the water tastes a little bit staler in Strasbourg. Yet we've no foreigners on tonight. This is an Irish event,
I have
very
an
much
Australian
so.
passport.
Yeah, well, yeah, I suppose Emma's actually a little bit foreign in that.
1% Berber.
Yeah. So, anyway, we're here. Thank you for tuning in. Hit share. Even though I don't even have the list of people from the last time in order to award or raffle off the Towards United Ireland mugs, we're going to have a big bonanza giveaway sometime. But joining us here in the European Parliament in Strasbourg at 8 o'clock French time is Lynn Boylan, MEP
Never
for
been happier.
Dublin. Lynn, I know, and she won't say this for reasons possibly of modesty, is very excited to be here. Emma Clancy, who many of you also know, is a GUI NGL advisor on economic and monetary affairs. So tonight we're going to try and talk about a few things that have happened during the course of the week. We want to talk about carbon taxes because Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael think that you can afford to pay more on the auspices of climate change. We want to talk about the fact that we're at Taxhaven now, Father. We also will mention a little bit about Brexit. They're changing the time on us here in Europe as well. We'll talk a little bit about that if we have time. But I have to say, there's a lady by the name of Linda who has been in touch on a number of occasions and has asked us to discuss the issue of medical cannabis. And I have to be honest about it, it's not an area that I would have much expertise in, but I am aware of a number of families who have family members who are ill and who are suffering severe pain and who have to go through additional pain in order to access cannabis-based treatments. So Emma, tell us the story about medical cannabis. What should be the position, what is the position, and what can we do to make the position fairer?
Well, unfortunately, there has only been one product that's actually been authorised as medicinal-based cannabis in the EU at the moment. I think all of the research shows very clearly that there is actually a therapeutic benefit of cannabis-based medicine for people with multiple sclerosis, for people who are undergoing chemotherapy, the anti-nausea effects. There are numerous people with PTSD and anxiety. There needs to be more research done into its therapeutic effects, but absolutely there is already a massive amount of evidence that shows that it is actually beneficial to treat these illnesses or these conditions. So, I mean, the people just need to be, governments in the EU, including the Irish government, need to be more receptive to science and to science-based knowledge. For people's information, there was recently, just last Strasbourg session, we had a vote on where the European Parliament overwhelmingly adopted a resolution, and all of the Sinn Féin MEPs voted in favour, calling on the member states of the EU. February last month.
Yeah.
So calling on the member states to reconsider their position of criminalising or preventing the use of medical marijuana or cannabis, and urging further research, urging cooperation with the WHO, there's a real appetite among MEPs across the entire EU for actual real change on this issue.
It has been a bit of a taboo subject for a long time, and I suppose it took a number of families just to expose their own situations. Lynn, there is obviously that broader discussion around cannabis and whether or not the criminalisation of cannabis actually serves any purpose. Others will point to the fact and say we've enough legalised drugs without bringing more into, I suppose, the facade of acceptability. But for the medical use of cannabis, it seems to be a no-brainer. If it makes people who are in a difficult position, who are suffering from pain, if it makes their lives a little bit easier, why is there a reluctance actually at an official level to make it available?
And I think it's probably part of it is nearly a branding issue that, you know, you have politicians who are equating something that's medicinal with something else. And as you said, we can have a conversation about decriminalising drugs another day, but for medicinal cannabis, that seems to be kind of a stumbling block that people need to get over. Legislators need to get over the idea that this is a medicinal product and to listen to the evidence, as Emma has said. You know, you need to be making policy that's based on sound scientific evidence, and I think there's probably a body of work that also needs to be done with general practitioners about the fact that this is an option for patients who are there, do you mean, and that they should be then. So I mean, I think part of it is raising awareness with our health practitioners, with our politicians, including ourselves, do you mean? But then following the science, and you know, there is a huge amount of evidence out there that it does have a therapeutic benefits. So we need to progress on it.
Someone called you the plastic paddy. What's that about?
That's probably my George Soros pal, is it?
It's a guy, John Darcy, our friend John Darcy.
Ah, John Darcy.
Yeah.
Now, John Darcy's just looking for another cup.
No,
tell him I'm not going to tell him what happened in Strasbourg on Monday night.
So in relation to Linda and other people's concerns, we are listening. We do hear what people are saying. We know that Louise O'Reilly is working with a number of opposition TDs to try and force the government to be more proactive on this issue. In fact, she mentioned earlier on today that it's something that she's pursuing in the Dáil next week. So keep an eye on it, and it is something that we will come back. So Emma, we're a tax haven now, according to the European Parliament. Is that just the EU once again interfering in our domestic affairs?
Well, there are a number of things going on, but I mean, the reality is that the Irish state plays a very specific role in the global economy, and that is as a conduit tax haven, which is a specific type of tax haven, which is basically a pass-through economy where the money doesn't end up there untaxed, because we do have, you know, a tax rate that's above zero, but they, in some cases. So it's not like a traditional tax haven like Bermuda or the Cayman Islands, but it is a pass-through economy where mainly US corporations, but very wealthy corporations, can set up a subsidiary and exploit certain tax loopholes and tax benefits, including, for example, the double Irish, which is still going on.
That's because there's loads of loopholes in the apparent...
Well, it hasn't actually... I mean, it's
it goes
being
on to
phased
2021.
out. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So Google is still using the double Irish with Bermuda to avoid tens of billions in tax every year. But I mean, the European Parliament, this is the first time it's adopted this position, so it's actually very significant because it has attempted to do so on a number of other occasions and failed. But this particular resolution that was voted on this week was based on very significant research by Oxfam, which found that if the EU was to apply its own criteria of what that it applied to every other country in the world
outside of the
EU to determine whether it should be on a tax haven blacklist, then 5 EU member states would actually meet those criteria and be included on that blacklist.
But of course, our government are going to say that they're not going to tax haven. I was on News Talk earlier on with Seamus Coffey, and he says Ireland's not a tax haven. I think it's important, though, that people recognise, I keep saying that being a tax haven is like being an early riser or a good kisser. It doesn't really matter what you think yourself, it's what others think about you. And all over the world, very reputable sources, including now one of the institutions of the European Union, these institutions that our own government are so in awe of on several occasions, are now describing Ireland as a tax haven. So it's going to have an impact.
Absolutely. I mean, the reputational damage is already out there. I mean, we've heard very high-profile people in lots of different countries refer to Ireland as being a tax haven, and then you have Brian Hayes on this morning saying we're not a tax haven. And as you're right, I mean, you can say it all you want, but the perception out there is very much that Ireland is a tax haven.
And the damaging thing about it is because, first of all, you know, we actually, as a party, defend sovereignty here.
Yes.
We do it Well, all the time, not just when it means that the alternative is corporations pay their taxes. This actually undermines the demand to actually maintain our tax sovereignty. It undermines that. But crucially, it's actually now becoming a big issue with corporations coming under big pressure from their consumers and from their shareholders, saying we don't want to actually be associated with tax dodging because it is becoming such a big issue. It's like the child labour issue of our time. So it could possibly actually damage our potential to attract foreign direct investment into the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely it could. I just think that the idea that you have sort of Fine Gael deflecting this somehow and trying to say, oh, this is just the Germans and the French that are jealous of us. Of course, we know that there are other games afoot in terms of Ireland and, trying
Mairead
to erode
McGuinness
away
told
our
me today
sovereignty,
that I was damaging Ireland's reputation by letting people in Ireland know what 400 odd MEPs have said about us yesterday.
But that's the very typical blue shirt response when you expose them for the hypocrisy. They say they suddenly want to get rid of the blue shirt and want everybody to don the green shirt and pretend that,
Well, that's what Michael Noonan said to me when we asked him about whether or not there was loopholes within the double Irish in the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee.
Yes, of course, Matt, you out here should be wearing the green jersey. And I heard the Ivan Yates say that to you again today.
Oh, I didn't know if anyone ever listened to that programme.
I saw it on Twitter that it was coming up, so I plugged in the earphones.
Okay, I'm sure Ivan will be delighted to hear
Sean
he is.
Kelly said it to me when I exposed the fact that we are laggards in climate change and that we actually play a negative role in the negotiations. I was told, that's a terrible thing to be saying in public. Do you know?
But the kind of really frightening thing about the interview that you did today, Matt, nothing to do with you.
No offence taken.
Was that you could web screen?
Seamus Coffey's comments were absolutely disgraceful. And he is supposedly meant to be an independent advisor to the government, the chair of the Fiscal Advisory Council. But it just shows you this whole level of state capture where every institution of the state is promoting this, single-mindedly. And we recently went on a visit with the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee to Dublin to meet with several state institutions.
That was one of the most boring days of my life. No disrespect
really
to all the people we met, but it was. Yeah.
But
one of them was Pascal Donoghue, by the way.
But no,
to give you a semblance of the day.
I mean, we're supposed to have, independent institutions that can actually analyse the reputational damage that this is doing. But all Coffey said, when you said this is doing damage to our reputation and it will, in fact, deter investment in the future, he said, well, there's no evidence of that. All we've seen in recent years is a surge in investment. And
I didn't get time to come in and say yes because we're after changing the intellectual property position.
Since 2015. So he's basically saying, that it's fine that we allow these mega wealthy corporations to pay zero tax, because that's what they do pay under this. The companies like Apple, who onshored their intellectual property to Ireland between 2015 and 2017, pay nothing in tax practically. Some cases nothing, some cases a very tiny amount. I found his comments really disgraceful and really frightening to be coming from the chair of our Fiscal Advisory Council.
Our government are willing to do essentially whatever it takes to allow the wealthiest corporations in the world to pay as little tax as possible anywhere in the world, because the facilitation, as you say, means that basically we're just a money launderer, if you want to use that term. But while they are willing to go to such extreme lengths, at the same token, they're willing to do whatever it takes in order to squeeze every last penny. And it appears that tomorrow we're going to have an Oireachtas report that is going to say that Irish families are going to have to pay additional in carbon taxes. Good idea for someone like you, Lynn, an environmentalist, cares about the environment, never shuts up about it, to be quite honest. And so here's the solution. Just nail Irish families for an extra charge when they buy their coal or heat their house, or
try to just drive to work because they don't have an alternative. No, I mean, what surprises me most is the passion at which the Green Party are jumping up and down.
That doesn't surprise me one bit.
Because, they don't accept the fact that they've been completely captured by this neoliberal ideology of the markets will fix it. So you're right, like families in Ireland can't afford to pay anymore. We've 400,000 households who are in fuel poverty. And now we're saying, do you know what? We're going to make you pay more for your fuel, make you pay more for your petrol if you have to drive. And then the Greens are saying, but we'll give you back a few bob at the end of the year and it'll be great. And you're kind of going, so, like, one, either a carbon tax is to incentivise you to change behaviour, or it's to raise revenue. I mean, it's just, the evidence shows that the carbon tax doesn't work. It's punitive. It's supported by the fossil fuel industries because they know it doesn't work.
And because they get compensation themselves.
Because they get compensation, exactly.
But how does that work?
Well, they have in other countries, like in Australia, they get massive handouts from taxpayers.
And in Canada, businesses benefited disproportionately to households with the dividend model. But also the likes of ExxonMobil and BP support fossil fuels because it creates a hierarchy of fossil fuels. So it basically says that gas is clean and coal and oil is dirty. So these companies are investing massive amounts of money in fracked gas, and we're saying that, you know, we're going to punish the people who are stuck with the diesel option, but the fossil fuel companies are investing in fracked gas, which locks us into using a fossil fuel for at least 30 years.
Okay, and we need to have a big debate because there's lots of other things that we need to be doing and should be doing in relation to addressing climate change. But what I find almost phenomenal around the debate around carbon tax is that Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the Greens, God knows what
Labour
position the Labour will take. They simply don't understand that people still are finding it almost impossible to survive. We deal with lots of people in mortgage distress, lots of people who are paying their mortgage currently, who are paying their childcare bills, all of the bills as they're coming in, they're managing. But they're afraid of the washing machine breaking or the car needing service out of.
But what's most bizarre about the fact that those parties who say they're on the left, like the Labour Party, and Fianna Fáil, who like to try and say they're somehow centre-left, I don't know, I think they're still trying to peddle that line, is that are they completely under a rock when it comes to the housing sector in Ireland at the moment and the situation? Because those who are still in rented accommodation, we know the issue around homelessness and those who are living inside hotels, obviously the people who are living on the street, but 1/3 of the population of Dublin is in rental accommodation. They're paying huge rents and they have no choice. They cannot retrofit their house. Because they
unless they're going to do it for their landlord,
No, but they don't own the property. So even then, they'd have to get permission from their landlord to do it.
And it would cost tens of thousands of euros.
And it costs thousands of euros to do it. And 55% of the rental properties are a BE or energy rating of D or less. So they're the worst affected because, you're basically saying to them, and I had one person on Twitter tonight go, well, he sits with a hot water bottle because he just thinks it's a great idea, carbon tax. And you're either saying that you want people to sit in the cold, sit in the dark, sit with a hot water bottle in order to be able to pay their rent because they can't change the situation they're in.
But the reality is we need absolutely fundamental change across all of society, across Ireland, across the EU. And the EU rules actually restrict us from making the sort of investment needed to invest in retrofitting, to invest in clean agriculture and clean energy, if we want to actually resolve this complete crisis and avoid a situation where we're facing, globally famine, disease, war, because there's...
Have you nothing positive to say?
This is actually what's going to happen in a very short amount of time.
Like how long? Am I going to sit alive?
12 years.
12 years. Yeah, touch and go, I'd say, okay. I suppose now you're going to tell us we should be thinking about the future generations or something, unicorn like that.
But that's actually what was really interesting about the climate strike in Dublin, because I went along to it and just to listen to the students.
Yeah, brilliant turnout.
There was at least 10,000 young people on the streets, and if you listen to the speeches, most of them, they weren't up there saying pay a carbon tax. In fact, the loudest chant was, system change, not climate change. Many of the students actually referred to the fact that ordinary people shouldn't be paying the price of corporate polluters. So those in the Green Party were saying, well, the future generations aren't going to forgive you for not having a carbon tax. They're not going to forgive us for not regulating.
But they were marching in support of Fine Gael I listened at the weekend. That's what we were told. It's like the time. Do you remember? Like, I swear to God, they've nothing to learn. But anything that they are learning, they're learning from Fianna Fáil. Do you remember the time there was 100,000 people marching in Dublin against the Iraq War and against the use of Shannon? And Fianna Fáil said they're basically coming out in support of government policy. But Fine Gael are doing the exact same
they were there for the photo ops, the
thing.
climate strike.
But all of the parties are so determined to avoid taking real action that's why they're completely focused on this single-minded.
But it's the response to everything. There's an issue with water, we'll charge people. There's an issue with whatever the case may be. Let's put a stealth charge on ordinary families, and it is a stealth tax because they disproportionately affect the poor in society.
It's the low-hanging fruit rather than actually going after the crux of the problem. I mean, and I always make the example, and I know it's far more complex with carbon than it is with CFCs. But when we had a hole in the ozone layer, we actually got the governments to come together and agree that these the CFC gases in your fridges and your household appliances were going to be.
Is that hole gone? I never hear anybody talking about it anymore.
Almost gone. It is. Yes. Yeah.
Really?
It used to be. Yeah.
I was told we were told it was going to be the end of the world.
But it shows you a different approach. How even in a short period of time, how that neoliberal markets approach is completely taken over. Because
I used to feel guilty when I'd be using me links, you know, as a young fella. I said, "Jeez, I'm going to ruin." But anyway, I said,
but we set a date and we said, after this date, there will be no more CFCs. We sent a very clear signal out there that that's it, they're going to be banned. And that's the type of approach we have to take with climate action. We have to just say, this is the date at which we're going to reach carbon neutrality. We're going to phase out the fossil fuel industries, and that requires system change. And that's why the resistance is so great, because everybody knows that the current economic model, you cannot do that. You can't tackle climate change within the current economic model.
Lads, underneath this video that you're watching, there's a wee button called share. You hit that and then it comes on your feed, and then all your friends can also watch in, and it means that they get to hear all these words of wisdom. You had one of the best delegations that we ever met, one of the most inspiring groups of people, the Stardust families over here this week. How did it go?
Really, really positive. The families of the Stardust fire are incredible.
Just, I suppose, remind people, because back 1981, you know, there's, I have a huge following among the young people, as you know, so a lot of our viewers wouldn't even recall that, they'd have heard things. So just explain what happened in 1981, Valentine's Night, 1981.
So Valentine's Night, the Stardust nightclub would have been one of probably the most popular nightclubs, certainly on the north side of the city, for young people to go to. And there was a big dance competition, and over 800 young people attended the nightclub that night, and 48 didn't come home.
There was a fire.
Went on fire.
The cause of which is still under some dispute.
Still disputed, but what happened was that very quickly a rushed procedure of the inquests happening very fast, and then an inquiry was set up, and there's huge issues of conflicts of interest around the inquiry. But the inquiry found, even though at the beginning the Judge Keane ruled out arson, then by the end of the report had actually come around to saying the findings were probable arson. And what probable arson, there's two key points on that. And one is that, like in the Hillsborough disaster, it tarred a whole community, and working class community, because that's the communities who went to the Stardust.
Yeah.
A whole working class community, that they were responsible for what happened that night.
That someone among the number.
Someone among that number had started the fire. And secondly, that it meant that the owners of the nightclub received compensation from the Dublin Corporation at the time. So that
isn't that like a story
it's
old as time almost.
It's like the more I speak with the families and the more I hear from them, the more you just go, there's something, every day I learn something new from those families, and every day I'm shocked by how they've been treated by this state. The manner in which they received payments, they were brought in, had to lift their tops up and show effectively a jury their injuries. They were told which counsellor they had to go to and how many sessions they would get. It's absolutely horrific, and it's been one whitewash after another, and it's because it's a working class community. If this had happened in a middle class part of Dublin, there's no way they'd still be fighting for justice.
Well, listen, they were
Yeah.
absolutely, they were a great crack, if nothing else. It's I always find, people like that who are striving for justice. It's amazing how just their,
It's
I
the
suppose,
solidarity
and
among them,
their
yeah.
own, zest for life, and they want to make every moment count. And coming over here, so well done to you and all your office on the campaign, and everybody who's been involved in that campaign. We've only a few minutes left. But Emma, what sort of genius thought it was a good idea to let the EU decide what time it was? So, just for those of you who don't know, the European Parliament this week voted to say that every member state had to abolish daylight savings time one way or another. And people might say, well, that's a good idea or that's a bad idea. The problem is that, well, there's a number of problems with it. First of all, it's a good discussion to have whether or not we should have daylight saving times or not. But if we're going to have the discussion, it should probably take place in Ireland, especially when we're a wee island, and especially when we have a little thing called partition. And the British government have said in post-Brexit they're not going to change their time. So we could end up having a situation where a man like myself, living in Carrickmacross, decides to go over to Newry, and I get there before I left. In terms of the times, is this just a nut job of
It's
a
completely
proposal?
crazy. I mean, it's crazy in terms of
It
the
upsets
impact
me, actually. It just annoys me because
it's a small thing.
because
but
you can't go on about it, because people will say, have you nothing better to be doing than going on about the time? But at the same time, it's just an example of this place having powers it doesn't need and shouldn't have.
It's a very clear example of ridiculous overreach
and it's people,
by the European
and
Commission.
MEPs who've been apparently championing this for years, because they obviously had nothing better to do. And some of our own from Ireland are talking about how great this is, how great that basically we're going to change the time of day literally when you have. And apparently there was a consultation process, but that's bullshit, quite frankly. And
about 80% of the people who responded were from Germany, so that just shows that the consultation process in the EU is not
symbolic
necessarily
of the EU.
I'm going to try and have one show without any anti-German sentiment, but tonight's not going to be that night. What the hell are we letting the Germans decide the time for? Finally, Brexit. So it's a big issue. Today's Wednesday. Friday was supposed to be actually Brexit Day, and we're holding a meeting in Letterkenny. Anybody who's within the area, come, because we're going to have a conversation that's called Brexit What's Next, but it'll be more of a discussion as opposed to us giving the answers, because nobody knows. But what we do know is that Theresa May this evening has said that when her deal is passed, she's going to resign as Prime Minister, in the clearest indication yet that she's probably going to be Prime Minister for another 5 years. Martina's still here with us. This isn't her last night in Strasbourg.
Not yet, no.
We expect her to be back in April, so that's the good news. But on the bad news side of things, Lynn, it means that nobody has a notion what's going on.
Well, they're voting tonight on the 8 options.
Yeah,
so.
but they're only, they're not meaningful votes.
They're indicative votes, yes.
Yeah.
We all are now experts on
I suppose if anybody's going to know anything about indicative votes, it's the European Parliament, but votes that don't really count for anything. But, okay, Lynn, what's going to happen with Brexit?
It appears Boris Johnson has wrote an article yesterday and has now come out completely the opposite and is saying now that he's going to back Theresa May's deal, as far as I can see, was the latest I seen on
He was
Twitter.
comparing himself to Moses the last time I checked. Yeah, I don't really care.
Well, I mean, when you have the issue, like I know, that they're referring to themselves now as grand wizards, some of them in the ERG, and using
Jesus
language
Christ.
that's
From the KKK.
Damien
KKK.
Sweeney reckons, breaking news, that Sammy Wilson has been offered the job of PM. Now, we haven't had time to verify that yet, but we'll take it that. But Emma, I was just thinking, the North of Ireland voted to remain. All this confusion about the second referendum, would it not be a good idea if we just had a united Ireland? I was thinking that may be an option. Should we
You mean
maybe
not to rejoin the Commonwealth?
and not without rejoining the Commonwealth?
Sure?
Perhaps it's something that people could think about.
Perhaps it's something that,
Yes.
Of
course, it makes the most sense. It solves all our problems, or at least a lot of them, and it gives us the potential to actually deliver a country that we can be proud of, with
With a
no
single
carbon
time
tax,
zone.
where everybody pays their fair share of
With the
taxes,
Green New
including the corporations, and where we decide what time of the day it is.
And where we scrap the
so
stability
listen,
and growth
thank
box.
you to Matthias and the team. We're going to have to see if this works because we're trying out a new contraption here. But listen, thanks very much. We're going to be back in April in Strasbourg, but we might be doing one of these in the meantime as well. So listen, talk to you all again soon. I thought we'd like this one here. This is for John Delaney. It's like a brainwave.
We should have had tennis balls.
I think we will win the World Cup.